So I'm going to apologize. I'm a native Bostonian. I've been told I speak far too quickly for the court reporter, stenographer, and for most of the audience, so I apologize. And I will endeavor to speak more slowly. If there's anyone in the audience who feels like I'm speaking too fast, just do this and I'll slow down. I appreciate that. And then for my colleagues, particularly Mr. Wyka, I think we're having a hard time hearing you, so make sure the mic is close to you, because it's not just for our live audience, but for our studio audience to be able to hear you clearly. With that, somebody's alarm's going off? Not mine? Okay, well, hopefully. Bag. If you leave a bag unattended and it's ringing, yes. Sorry about that. So if that person returns, let them know that Jeremy absconded with their bag, just for housekeeping. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. We're going to call everybody back to order for what we're going to call session 3. I do want to recognize, I believe we have somebody from Congresswoman Fernandez's office. Is Matt Miller, the field representative, here? So I just want to recognize Matt. Thank you for coming out, and thank Congresswoman Fernandez for her attention to these issues. It's really important, so appreciate your being here today. So we're going to continue our discussion with the NNSA panel, but again, in order to provide some clarity and some background, we're going to start with Mr. Rossetti, our technical director, to just give an opening statement to lay the groundwork for this next session. Okay, Mr. Rossetti.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to continue to provide background information to assist the public in understanding today's hearing. I'll also remind everyone of our acronym list and glossary of key terms for today, which we have provided on our website. I will continue to discuss active confinement ventilation. The purpose of an active confinement ventilation system is to ensure that nearly all airborne radioactive particles are captured before the air is released outside. Exhibit 23 shows a simple diagram of an active confinement ventilation system with fans in the center that draw the facility air through high-efficiency particulate air filters, or HEPA filters, at the left to capture radioactive particles. The fans then expel the filtered air up the stack at the far right. Other systems needed to power and control the system are shown in the diagram as well. I explained earlier that one way to classify system resilience following an earthquake is performance category, and I described the difference between PC2 and PC3. Certain components of PF4's active confinement ventilation system are only designed to PC2, preventing the entire active system from being qualified to the more stringent PC3 level. This means that the passive confinement system, which does not include fans moving air through the system, remains the primary engineered control for the bounding accident. As was discussed in the last session, this approach is less reliable because it is highly dependent on how long the building doors to the outside remain open. A safety class system, which is necessary to protect the public from potential accidents, typically requires its components to be qualified to PC3. Additional features are also required for a safety class system. 1, redundancy, where there are multiple components in case one were to fail. 2, diversity, where there are different types of components, such as having a mix of electrically and air-driven actuators. And 3, physical separation of components to minimize the risk of damage from the same event. In this way, any single failure would not cause the entire system to fail. However, as I mentioned earlier, portions of the active confinement ventilation system are neither safety class nor PC3 for the bounding earthquake, a topic the board members will explore later. In addition, some of the safety systems in the plutonium facility contain original components from when the facility began operations in 1978. While some major components, such as portions of the facility control system and the uninterruptible power supply, or UPS, have been replaced or upgraded recently, other components, such as dampers, ductwork, and cabling, are being slowly replaced on a piece-by-piece basis. Without comprehensive upgrades, the overall system is still reliant on PC2 equipment. This is a concern as a safety system is only as reliable as its weakest link. In recommendation 2020-1, the board recommended that the department develop an integrated approach to maintaining aging infrastructure. As I discussed before, Triad addressed some aging component issues with preventative maintenance. For example, Exhibit 24 shows a ventilation fan slated for replacement. Aging management is about ensuring that components are replaced before they fail, as opposed to allowing them to fail and losing production time while waiting for replacement. Though you may not think about it every day, this is an important concept in everyday life. For example, the owner's manual of your vehicle has a schedule that tells you when preventative maintenance should be performed to ensure reliable operation. This includes oil changes and transmission fluid changes to maximize the life of the engine and the transmission, in addition to more complex maintenance such as replacing the timing belt and spark plugs to prevent engine failure. Commercial nuclear power operators purchase parts with known service life requirements. They routinely test sample items from manufacturers using strict quality assurance requirements. Since many of these requirements are the same or similar for defense nuclear facilities, DOE can obtain manufacturer specifications for many components. As with the automobile maintenance comparison, such activities can be a short-term cost, but a long-term efficiency. If components are replaced before they fail, operational disruptions can be avoided and accidents can be prevented. Finally, I will draw your attention to Exhibit 25. The board's Technical Report 46, issued in 2020. Amidst discussion about production, the radioactive waste it generates should not be forgotten. The picture on the left shows the potential consequences of not understanding the contents of waste containers. In 2018, a number of waste drums at the Idaho National Laboratory overpressurized and ruptured after unforeseen chemical reactions occurred in the drums. One of the elements of the technical report that Mr. Summers discussed previously was the importance of appropriately prioritizing storage locations based on the risk associated with each container's contents. The board staff shares the concern that outdoor storage locations do not provide additional protection for a release of radioactive material from a waste container. In my opinion, if space is available in more protective locations, then the use of these locations should be prioritized as more waste is generated. I know the board members plan to explore these important topics as well as additional elements of Triad safety management programs that touch on workers in this session. This concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Rossetti. So we're going to start with Mr. Summers to ask the first question for this session.
Thank you, Chair Connery. Dr. Mason and Mr. Wyka, in the previous session, we discussed NNSA's decision to not pursue a safety class active confinement ventilation system. A safety class system would reduce the consequences from a bounding earthquake. Now, we'd like to discuss whether NNSA can upgrade the existing active ventilation system to be more robust, even if it would not be safety class. So first, I have three questions. The first is to Dr. Mason. Dr. Mason, as our staff and as I understand, many major components that are shown in Exhibit 26 will be fully seismically qualified, but the interfaces and the support systems contain weak links. For example, cable conduits for electrical power and air systems to actuate dampers. They may not be similarly qualified. Following your planned upgrades, will the active confinement ventilation system function after the PC3 earthquake?
So the active ventilation system already in place, which is safety significant, not safety class, already has significant redundancy and actually is highly reliable. We see that manifested in the operations of the plant. The upgrade strategy that you mentioned to the ventilation and support systems focuses on replacing major components, such as some of those illustrated in that flow diagram, to achieve a more robust ventilation system. This is going to be done by proactively managing obsolescence, increasing seismic performance, and in some cases, adding further redundancy. And in fact, in some cases, those actions have already been taken. As components are replaced, they're seismically tested and they're being procured to safety class standards, although as you point out, the fact that individual components may be qualified to safety class does not mean that the entire system meets that specification. But it does provide for a more robust system able to withstand greater insults. And we are also pursuing additional redundancy in facility uninterruptible power supplies and backup diesel generator support systems, since those can also be important for operating through upset conditions. So during a design basis PC3 earthquake, the ventilation is not expected or required to operate because of the fact that we do rely on this passive confinement system. That means that during a seismic event of this magnitude, there may be some systems that would fail or otherwise be compromised. And that's why we have these other steps to mitigate the off-site dose. And in this scenario, however, the facility would still be maintained at negative pressure with respect to the outside environment. If in a PC3 earthquake there was a total loss of power instrument error, for example, there would be no fans running, but the facility would be in passive confinement mode, breathing through intake and exhaust HEPA filter plenums to achieve equilibrium with the outside environment. So hopefully that at least partially addresses your question, and Ted may want to add some more.
Really just amplify, our upgrade strategy is managing obsolescence and eliminating single point failures like Tom mentioned. And as components are replaced, a lot of the figures that you have identified there, they are seismically tested and procured to safety class standards. And we're doing upgrades in a lot of areas, to the structural ventilation system, the control systems, the generator and diesel power supplies, and exhaust and bleed fans. And so redundancy is being pursued, in the UPS and backup diesel generator systems, as Tom mentioned. And in electrical cables and ductwork will have to be considered. And I keep reaching to the revised DSA. That is the document that is going to be used for the modeling and for identifying what are the controls that we have in place. And as Tom mentioned, PF4 meets safety class passive confinement following evaluation-based earthquake, and that would contain and confine the materials within PF4.
Thank you, Dr. Mason, and thank you, Mr. Wyka. The next question is addressed to Dr. Mason, please. Now, I would like to discuss the improvements to system reliability. PF4 has experienced recent failures of damper actuators, which resulted in roughly 3 lost production days in 2022. Can you discuss, Dr. Mason, opportunities to add redundancy, diversity, and separation to achieve benefits to both safety and operations?
Yeah, this is a very important topic for us, particularly if we're to meet the mission objectives that have been stated not just for pit production, but for all the plutonium missions. As a result of investments that have been made over the years to this point, we are seeing improved operational performance of many of the systems, although we still have work to do to get all of them to where they need to be. Just to sort of highlight this, I would like to make note of the fact that in FY21, we had 19 production weeks for pit production inside the plant. In FY22, that increased to 30 weeks of production time. And in some sense, one can view that as an aggregate measure of a number of things that are actually very relevant to both safety and security. Because if you look at the origin of downtime that prevents production activities, there can be a range of things ranging from the length of time to do inventories on nuclear materials, which is obviously an important security-related thing, to outages such as the ones that you mentioned. So the fact that we've been able to improve from 19 weeks in 21 to 30 weeks in 22, as I said, is a kind of aggregate measure of that improved operational performance. We are not yet at our goal. We want to get to 40 weeks. So there is more work yet to be done. But I think we're seeing the benefits of investments that have been made in those systems over the years to this point. In some cases, we have had instances where systems that we were planning to replace failed before we replaced them. And so that just highlights the need of sustaining this effort, which I think both Ted and I spoke to a little bit in response to the last question in terms of adding additional redundancy to things like uninterruptible power supplies, putting in place more robust and seismically tested components so that they're less prone to failure. And quite frankly, in many cases, just simply replacing equipment that's old that may have been in place in the facility since the time that it was constructed. And I think that we heard mention of the car analogy. There are some components of the car that one needs to plan for replacement, not because they're failing in an unanticipated way, but because they're simply approaching their end of life. And that's what we mean when we talk about, using obsolescence as one of the measures of those replacements, is getting new systems in place, hopefully before the failures occur.
Thank you, Dr. Mason. Ted, did you want to add something, sir?
Yeah, just add to that, at least from the field office perspective, Tom is right in that metric of production time, which is pretty remarkable, from 19 to 30 weeks. A lot of contributing factors. But in terms of aging infrastructure modernization, one thing that, we work with the LANL team is, they have, yes, ma'am, I will. They have system engineers are assigned to all nuclear safety systems. And they track system performance through system health reports, identify necessary spare parts, and oversee maintenance on their systems. So they try to stay in front of the bow wave. Completed systems include the UPS, a criticality alarm system, confinement doors, and instrumental controls, with their safety engineers assigned, and their work in process things now include like the fire alarm, facility control system, fire suppression, and the diesel generator. So it takes, not only the replacement and upgrades, but also, assigning personnel, safety engineers to track, those systems and the health of those systems.
Thank you for the further amplification. And my last question on this topic to Mr. Wyka. What are your thoughts on addressing the weak links so that the entire system can survive the bounding PC3 earthquake?
I think it's looking at, again, upgrading the systems, doing the things that we've already done and doing, which includes, again, the structural ventilation systems, control systems, generator and diesel power supplies, exhaust and bleed-off fans. That's an incremental improvement. I look at it sort of as an incremental, deliberate improvement, recognizing that we're never to a PC3 safety class until we replace all the components. But as we get to the point of replacing some of that ductwork, as well as electrical components, through our DSA, upgraded DSA, we'll look at, the improved upgrades that we would do in those areas to get to that, incremental point where I think we all need to be.
I appreciate that response. Just one follow-up question. From a prioritization standpoint, to get the most safety advantage out of those particular investments, if you will, in those areas as you incrementally upgrade those safety systems, have you taken a look at prioritizing what areas in PF4 would be advantageous to prioritize first from the weakest link perspective?
As I mentioned, we are trying to systematically work our way through the systems and have identified components that we intend to replace. And part of the objective is actually to get the most immediate return on safety investment rather than, waiting for some grand thing that could take a long time to realize. I should note there are other constraints that we do have to factor in terms of the planned work for the facility and potential interferences and so forth. So certainly we prioritize in terms of getting our maximum bang for our safety dollar, but we also have to integrate that into the overall schedule for the facility. And one of the things that we've been working very hard on for the last several years is actually developing a fully integrated schedule of all of the activities in PF4, the upgrades, the production work for pits, plus the other important mission work that we do, and not forgetting that actually one of our products is waste, and that we also have to be moving waste out of the facility. So it's sometimes a bit of a dance to get all that right, but we're trying to prioritize our safety investments to those that deliver the maximum benefit in the nearest time frame that we can.
Thank you, Dr. Mason. Thank you, Mr. Wyka. Chair Connery.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Roberson?
Thank you, Chair Connery. Let's make sure I'm speaking loud enough, too. I got chest size. If I can quickly, Chair, I'd like to just follow up on a question from the last session regarding, I guess, what I characterize as assurance that the passive confinement approach was active. And Dr. Mason, you and I had an exchange about differential pressure monitoring, which you indicated does exist. Is that monitor seismically qualified, though? Will it survive the earthquake?
I think that's one that we should probably get you more detail in the follow-up for the record.
Thank you. And then the other one we talked about was the door closer. We wanted to make sure you and I were talking about exterior doors, not interior doors, and that I understood correctly that known last person out closes the door. That was the assurance.
Yes, so we are talking about the exterior doors that are important for this calculation that we're talking about for the offsite. And as I said, it's part of the emergency response procedure to verify closure of those external doors.
Thank you, sir. Now to my actual question. A picture of cable trays and electrical conduit is shown in Exhibit 27. Have that up? Yes. These connect the facility control system to fill equipment such as sensor and dampers. The facility control system is key to the functioning of the ventilation system. Without it, the ventilation system will not work. Triad is working to replace the logic controllers for the facility control system, which is a safety significant system. We understand Triad concluded that its effort did not need to follow DOE standard that covers safety significant systems, known as DOE Standard 1195, because the scope of the upgrade was limited. However, future efforts are planned to replace sensors and actuators, and in total, when you put the pieces together, these upgrades constitute a full safety instrumented system for which the standard was intended to apply. And so I wanted to go to you, Mr. Wyka, since you agreed and approved. Why not apply the standard to ensure the integrated safety instrumented system is designed to provide high reliability in accordance with DOE directives?
Thank you. That is a standard I would look into and applying, and I'd probably have to get back to you for the record on the specific circumstances
Okay.
for this issue, but again.
Well, I'd appreciate that. That would be great. Then I want to ask you my second question, which I assume you were going to say you just weren't going to do it. So I appreciate to hear back from you, and we'll wait for that. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, we just want to make a comment on the picture is changed to a facility control system. It's not a cable conduit, so we didn't mean to confuse anybody.
That's why I have glasses.
Yes, aging infrastructure. We need glasses now to read our notes. Okay, the next question is moving on to other safety system infrastructure. And so we're going to go back to talk about fire protection, and to Dr. Mason, the lab started upgrading the fire suppression system in PF4 to safety class about a decade ago. Currently, several facilities are connected to the same fire water loop as PF4, shown in Exhibit 28. I'm going to look up to make sure that that's what that shows. Yes, okay. Because these facilities all have different seismic pedigrees, we can't be assured of the whole loop's performance following the bounding seismic event. In other words, there might not be enough water for PF4 because of the pipe ruptures and these other structures. So can you just discuss the current schedule and any concerns with completing the work on the sprinkler piping in PF4, establishing a new fire water supply loop to separate PF4 from the non-seismically qualified buildings, and implementing these upgrades in a revised safety analysis?
Yeah, so the work to increase the seismic performance of the fire suppression system is important in terms of realizing the significant offsite dose reduction. The removal of non-seismically qualified buildings is going to be performed in 3 phases. First phase is installation of a high-pressure feed, then water line installation to the west to support program expansion buildings, followed by water line installation to the east to support some of the security components. These projects are on track to meet our deadline for the 30 pit per year production. And the status of the individual phases: phase 1, design is complete, the execution contract has been awarded. At phase 2, the design will be completed in FY23, and phase 3 is still pending funding. We're under a continuing resolution right now. I don't anticipate any problems, but we have to respect the power of the purse. So that's a little bit where things stand in terms of those, but it is definitely our intent to move those non-seismically qualified systems off to prevent the scenario that you identified.
I appreciate that, and we do believe it's really good news that we are moving ahead on those projects, and it is obviously an illustration of how we're trying to catch up to the production by upgrading these systems as we are also moving forward with the activities that you have to do to meet your requirements with regards to production. We do believe that the seismically qualified seismically qualified fire suppression is a good thing for PF4, but as we discussed earlier, we don't know that that's necessarily going to be sufficient. So necessary, but not necessarily sufficient. With that, over to you, Mr. Summers.
Thank you, Chair Connery. I'd like now to move to a few questions about glove box stands in PF4. And I'll have one question for Dr. Mason, Administrator Ruby, and Mr. McConnell. Since 2009, laboratory engineering staff have been systematically analyzing the safety systems within PF4 to determine whether they can withstand the estimated ground motion during the bounding earthquake. On the left side of Exhibit 29, we see a glove box that is seismically deficient which means it may be at risk of toppling, spilling, and impacting plutonium during a seismic event. On the right side, we see a new glove box, that is qualified to withstand the bounding earthquake. The differences in bracing and footings are obvious. Triad has made progress with glove box analysis, but some of the glove boxes do not meet the required seismic capacity. Many of these glove boxes support higher hazard operations involving heat source plutonium, plutonium oxide powders, or plutonium solutions. My first question is to Dr. Mason. Dr. Mason, can you speak to how many glove boxes do not meet the required seismic capacity and how many remain unanalyzed at this point?
We can provide the exact numbers for the record, but I would say this is an area where we have made significant progress, but much more remains to be done. The most important glove boxes have already been upgraded in terms of the release hazard associated particularly with molten plutonium operations. And in addition, with the work commencing on the LAP4 project, as it's known, and some related major items of equipment, we now have a very full pipeline of new glove boxes that will be installed in Pier4 that are designed to meet or exceed the seismic performance requirements. In fact, I would say for the next 4 or 5 years, we will be designing, procuring, and installing glove boxes at about the fastest rate we can accommodate. So at this point, it's more a question of the industrial capacity for actually design and procurement that is really the limiting factor. And as you note in the photograph, the modern glove boxes are built to modern standards. They are more robust to withstand that kind of design basis event. Furthermore, when we modify a glove box line, we don't just look at the glove box, we do an analysis for the whole line. And if there's a need to perform retrofits on the balance of the glove boxes in the line, we also do that. And so for the remaining glove boxes, the focus is on performing the required analyses to quantify the magnitude of the vulnerability, and that will allow us to develop a strategy and prioritize further retrofits and put in place any new controls that are needed.
Thank you, Dr. Mason. And we appreciate your offer to work with our staff in order to get a number that can be added and entered into the record. My second question is for Administrator Ruby. Ma'am, NNSA has continued operations with deficient glove box stands since, as I'm informed, since at least 2011. Given that PF4 has many decades of service ahead, would you discuss how long NNSA is willing to accept these deficient conditions, ma'am? Thank you.
Thank you. This is one of the sort of ironies of the situation we have is that because of the mission demands, we now have the resources that are needed to improve our safety. And for many years, resources, and it was not while I've been here, but in this job, but the resources were not there to do all of the safety upgrades that you know would be good to do. We have an unusual situation about glove boxes that Tom alluded to. We're actually, we have a glove box working group because we are pushing the demand for glove box manufacture, you know, to its limits, and we're trying to work with glove box manufacturers in the United States to increase their capacity to meet our demands for the project here at Los Alamos, as well as Savannah River, and other projects, because pretty much everything we do is in glove boxes. So we're working, we recognize this. We're actually trying to prioritize not only within facilities, but across the complex, and working with vendors to increase capacity on glove boxes. I don't have a number for you of when we might be able to replace them all, and I am confident in the facilities where we're not doing mission critical work right now, we haven't yet obtained the funding. But I appreciate the question, and it's obviously something that we need to continue to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Administrator Ruby. My third question is for Mr. McConnell. Many of the deficient glove boxes are not used for pit manufacturing and will not benefit from the investments that NNSA is making for that program. For example, there are currently about 40 heat source plutonium glove boxes that also need upgrades. These boxes support NNSA's defense programs and NASA. Do these customers help fund upgrades for these deficient glove boxes?
So as you mentioned, some of those customers are internal NNSA customers who do fund and support the overall operations of PF4. The other customers external to NNSA pay through the charges that are set up, the space charges, but we can get specifics from the laboratory, for the cost of operation. One of the challenges we have is to figure out how to amortize the cost of upgrades to people who right now are users. And so they cover the cost of use, but later on, if we decide that we need to upgrade a glove box, for example, they may no longer be doing programmatic work in that box. But yet there's still residual that's left there. So the answer is yes for some, but there is a challenge and a gap that we need to figure out how to make sure we can account for the need to do these upgrades to all our boxes. But then this is another one of those ironies that the boxes that are in use are the ones for which there's funding, but since they're in use, there's a programmatic implication to take them out of service in order to upgrade them. The ones that are not in use, we could, from a safety perspective, update more easily, but they're not a high priority because there's not a hazard because they're not in use. So we need to figure out as part of our aging and as part of our overall facility, at the end of the day, NNSA is responsible for PF4, and if an event happens in an idle box used by somebody else, it's going to impact pit production because we're going to have, it's going to have production impacts. So we own that risk at a fundamental level, and we need to, and we do take that into account. The issue, as I said, is about trying to figure out how to prioritize when the things that are most active because they're associated with our most critical ongoing mission. So there's a chicken and an egg problem there.
Thank you, Mr. McConnell. Chair Connery.
So I just want to follow up on that because you said two things that sounded a little bit contradictory. So I understand NNSA's mission needs and the need to replace glove boxes, and I understand the demand and the whole glove box working group situation. However, when you're talking about something, say, NASA's mission, which as a taxpayer, if you're talking about our deterrent versus NASA, that's a different scenario. And you're basically saying that you're accepting the risk for NASA for not upgrading their heat source plutonium glove boxes, even though that could actually hurt the mission for the deterrent? That doesn't make sense to me.
Thank you for allowing me to clarify that. And I think before I'm done, I'll turn it over to to the laboratory who knows better than I, but 238 is an asset. The capability to do plutonium-238 work. There's a room in PF4 that's specially designed to do 238 work. There are multiple customers that do 238 work. Sometimes it's us, sometimes it's NASA, and so we need that operation to be able to function to do our work, and we need to make sure we can mitigate any potential risk because it's posed to our work. But our funding models fund day-to-day operations. They don't fund we don't fund recapitalization of our infrastructure through what would in this case be an SPP strategic partnership plan. So that falls to NNSA as the landlord to do infrastructure modernization, but I'll let the laboratory elaborate.
Yeah, there is a challenge this is not unique challenge to Los Alamos. There are a number of nuclear facilities across the complex that are multi-program in nature. And in fact, for the PU-238 for NASA, that work is done at Oak Ridge National Lab, at Los Alamos National Lab, and at Idaho National Lab. And I know from prior experience the challenges at Oak Ridge in basically arriving at an interagency deal as to who's going to pay for what. And it does take a little bit longer. It doesn't mean you don't do it. And certainly, in the end, the steward of the facility, Office of Science in the case of Oak Ridge, Office of Nuclear Energy in the case of Idaho, NNSA in the case of Los Alamos, has the ultimate responsibility for the facility. But it just takes a little more time to work out some of those arrangements when there are multiple government agencies involved. I'm confident that we can figure out how to get that done, but sometimes the difficulties extend beyond the agencies because you have different committees of jurisdiction in Congress and, different energy and water versus CJS probably for NASA. It's work that needs to be done.
I appreciate that. It sounds very complicated, and clearly, since it's been since 2009 that we've identified this problem, it's taken a long time to address. Ms. Roberson?
Thank you, Chair Connery. The laboratory does have a history of pushing back safety-related upgrades while we're talking about upgrades, as shown in the table in Exhibit 30. Many of the upgrades keep slipping to the right. For example, in 2011, the fire suppression seismic upgrades were estimated to be completed in 2013, but that has slipped to 2026 in the latest estimates. At the same time, TRIDE is also trying to accomplish a tremendous amount of construction work on other systems across the lab. Now, I recognize probably only Mr. McConnell has been around for that long, but I'd like to ask you, Mr. Mason, what do you believe are the fundamental causes behind these delays?
I guess the first thing I'd like to point out is recently Marv Adams, works for Jill as the head of defense programs, had the occasion to give a talk where he was saying he was eagerly looking forward to the point in time when he would be able to tell people that he had pulled his schedule to the left. And I would say it's our objective in the case of the fire suppression seismic upgrades to, pull things to the left. So hopefully the shifts are not always in the same direction. There can be a number of reasons that things take longer than one would like. And I think we've experienced all variants of those reasons. Usually there's a timeline to get funding. As the administrator mentioned, at the moment, we're experiencing a rather difficult environment in terms of workforce. And I would say at the moment, rather unusually at Los Alamos, for our work in PF4, we are primarily not funding limited. It pains me to say that. As a lab director, I have been trained to say I need more money. But in this particular case, at least right now, we are more constrained by the capacity to execute the work, which gets to things like the availability of craft labor. The industrial capacity, we talked about the glove box working group and so forth. So at the moment, that is more what's driving the timelines, in contrast to probably all of recorded human history up to this point, where we would be able to point our fingers at funding as being the major problem.
So are there things that you can do or plan to do to address the shortage of craft workers?
Yeah, this is a particularly important topic for us right now. We have already been taking steps to try and alleviate those pressures. We saw, actually, within the last year, we've seen an increase in the attrition rates that we are experiencing. And so we have taken a number of steps to try and mitigate that, not just for the craft workforce, but for the workforce as a whole. We have been able to get approval from NNSA for some stipends, additional stipends for high demand skills, things like electricians that are particularly in demand. In New Mexico, one of the challenges we have is when oil and gas prices are high, the Permian Basin is a pretty lucrative opportunity if you're a pipe fitter or an electrician. I would say we enjoy a good working relationship with the New Mexico Building Trades Council, and they have been working with us on some educational programs with area high schools where we can get access to students who have an inclination to working with their hands and interested in pursuing the skilled trades. And that takes the form of an apprenticeship program with training provided by the New Mexico Building Trades Program and an apprenticeship working at the lab. So we're trying to develop the pipelines regionally, since most of that craft workforce is regionally recruited, and work with the educational institutions, also with community colleges on pipeline programs that will help us secure the workforce that we need. The good news is, I would say, some of those steps are starting to show positive results. So we have reversed the trend where our craft numbers were declining, and for about the last 6 months, they've been headed back up, and I think we are now, for the first time ever, I think the last weekly report I saw, we were above 1,300. Now, we still have a couple hundred more that we need to get in place in order to execute the work program ahead of us. And so we're looking at, more innovative things that we may need to do, for example, in the area of transportation, but that's work yet to be done.
Thank you, sir. We wish you success on that. We really do. Any follow-ups? No? Okay. For decades, the commercial nuclear power sector has qualified its equipment to ensure it functions for a defined period. This has benefits of increased reliability and focused maintenance and avoids the run-to-failure mentality. This does not seem to be the case at PF4. For example, as shown in Exhibit 31, put my eyeballs on. Yeah, okay, right exhibit. NNSA's own investigators wrote that insufficient inspection, and I quote, coupled with a run-to-failure mentality, end quote, led to significant risk to workers. Pictured in Exhibit 3.6, the glove box was in operation until an unused sample port failed and leaked contamination. Additionally, aging management is a key part of the board's recommendation 2020-1. In the recommendation, the board expressed concerns whether DOE can still safely operate and maintain aging facilities because safety systems may degrade and not be able to reliably perform their safety functions. So, Mr. Wyka, NNSA is investing considerable resources to rejuvenate safety system infrastructure at PF4. What are your thoughts on adopting a formal aging management program, such as establishing qualified equipment lifetimes to mitigate in-service failures that could create safety issues and disrupt mission work?
Thank you, Madam. Yeah, no, I think that's very important. With the aging infrastructure, with the, issues that, like was identified in this, which involved work control issues, oversight type activities, as well as system configuration for doing the work that was designed to do. I think it's critically important that we, do continue to make improvements, in that type of planning.
Okay, thank you, sir. Well, Administrator, I'll just put my 2 cents in. I think we are really appreciative of the leadership role NNSA is taken in the implementation of this element of our recommendation. But more importantly, we certainly hope NNSA sees the benefit for its own operations in the near term and long term in investing in something like this.
You can be sure we do, and I just, Tom, one thing that hasn't been said yet, that maybe Tom can elaborate on a little bit, is he and has changed his team to put people in place to pay more attention to things like this, different leadership, and it might be worth Tom, just explaining some of the changes you've made in terms of leadership and responsibilities to pay attention to integrated operations and the safety systems.
Actually, this was actually an important element of the proposal that we made to manage Los Alamos. Probably the most relevant piece that was part of that proposal for PF4 was to actually change the operating model for the facility. And this was based on experiences that I had in my prior roles at Oak Ridge, where I'd been responsible for the high-flux isotope reactor, a Category 1 nuclear facility, and also the spallation neutron source, which is a large accelerator facility with a target that has an inventory equivalent to a hazard Category 2 facility, although it's regulated under the accelerator order. And in both those cases, we found very significant benefits from having a more integrated management model. And by that, I mean, for our standard kind of lab spaces and office spaces, we operate under a landlord-tenant model. There's a facilities organization who operates those buildings, and then there are researchers and staff who occupy those buildings, as tenants. And, there's an understanding between the landlord or the tenant of, how much space charge you're paying and what services you get provided. But, there's not a need to really tightly integrate those things because, if you're in an office space is an office space, the hazards are pretty well understood and quantified and don't really depend on, what your job is on Tuesday versus Wednesday. For these highly complex integrated facilities like PF4, that model, in my experience, really doesn't work very well because the work that you're doing in the facility is an integral part of the hazard. You cannot separate the work from the facility, from the hazard. And so we created this organization, the Associate Laboratory Director for Weapons Production, who has both the operational responsibility for the hazard, for the facility, and is responsible for the work that will be going on in that facility, whether it's pit production, or the PU-238, is another production mission. The work that we do for Ares is another production mission. That, I think, is, if you distribute that responsibility, it's possible to operate well, but it's a whole lot harder because now you've introduced additional interfaces and structural barriers between the work that's being done and the safety work that needs to be done and the upgrades and so forth. So that was a very important piece, and I think it has led to some improvement in operations. Another change that we instituted more recently, recognizing the large level investments that's needed to get the infrastructure to where it's needed to be, we created within our weapons program organization a directorate for plutonium infrastructure. Historically, the way the work was done in the facility was we had an organization that did capital projects, and they did all the capital projects, whether it was a glove box in PF4 or, replacing small build and a warehouse at the firing site. And when you had a small volume of work, it made more sense to have a sort of centralized organization that did everything. But given the volume of work that we have associated with the plutonium infrastructure, we felt it merited a dedicated organization where that is all that they do. They don't have to spend part of their day worrying about the warehouse being constructed in the back 40 for the high explosives program. There's someone else who will worry about that. And in particular, since they have responsibility for all the infrastructure work in the TA-55 area, that allows us to better integrate the planning because there are multiple funding models for all of that work. We have major items of equipment that are being funded by the programs. We have something called CMRR, which is making investments in, for example, upgrading the RULAB facility to become a HAZCAT 3 nuclear facility. And we have LAP4, which is the largest line item. And all of that work is taking place in the same space, with the same trained workforce, with the same interface to the production activities. So we've made a number of organizational steps. Of course, the most important thing is actually not the org chart. It's who are the people that you populate in those positions. And we've tried hard to blend people with a long experience at the lab who know all the nooks and crannies of that facility, because there is a lot of history there, with people who have experiences from across the complex. Some of the work in PF4 is actually more akin to the EM work because the first part of that project is D&D, the removal of the old glove boxes. So we brought in people from the EM program who have that experience. We brought in people from the commercial nuclear industry who have experience with managing outages and major upgrades of commercial reactors. That's the closest analogy I could find to upgrading the facility while you're running it. And so that combination of trying to get an organizational structure that at least doesn't make it harder, hopefully makes it easier, and bringing in a lot of new people with good experience from other sectors to complement the in-house long-term knowledgeable staff that we have, I think is helping us.
Thank you for allowing us to do that, because I think it is the companion piece to the program looking at hardware updates, as are we staffing, organizing for success and not just keeping a static model? So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Did you want to say something, Jim? I'm reading your eyes. No.
I couldn't add to that. That was very,
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That was a great explanation about the structure of how Triad is operating. I want to return to our technical report 46, which highlighted the need to have safety controls in the event of release of radioactive material from a waste container. In particular, the containers stored outside the laboratory have no such controls to reduce the consequences of a release. Triad has made great progress in reducing how many waste containers are stored outside, as you can see in Exhibit 32. On the left is an outdoor storage area from 2019, and on the right is the status from about a month ago. This is tremendous progress. However, waste generation will increase as you remove legacy materials from PF4, and I will just say I walked the basement the other day and was extremely pleased at the progress of removing a lot of that material. But as you remove the legacy materials of PF4 and ramp up pit production, there's going to be increased waste generation. So, Mr. Wyka, I want you to take a moment to talk about the efforts that you've taken to date. Obviously, they've been extremely successful, and any future initiatives you will take to minimize the number of waste containers that are stored outdoors to preclude that type of situation.
Yes, ma'am, I will do that. But first, I'll really appreciate the technical 46. I think that helped us immensely, in our deliberate and long-term actions dealing with the incompatible materials. And as you know, I led the accident investigation down at WIP, so understand that significantly. And it allowed us to, put special administrative controls in place to minimize cheesecloth for anything within greater than 12 molars of nitric acid, as well as some long-term plans. But with respect to your question on waste management, and this is an issue of partnership, because fundamental to PIP production is a lot of the other things that we need to do. A large piece of that is handling waste, specifically true waste, and getting that to its proper place so that we can reduce the MAR limitations as well as just a geographical storage location. So this took a partnership between the entities here in New Mexico. So we formed an executive team, the field office managers, myself and Mike McAlannis, EMLA, who you met with earlier, as well as the Carlsbad field manager, as well as the M&O leads for each organization, because everybody was doing a great job, but it was by putting this leadership team together, it was a way to look at where we can really gain efficiencies and effectiveness in the process. The statistics, it used to take about 500 days to get an average drum off the hill. And if you look at the flow chart of the process, the drum doesn't move all that much, but it's the paperwork that moves and the approvals and stuff. I think we're now at about 200, but really to get us into PIP production, that needs to be in the tens of days. And that requires, the leadership to look at, where we can gain efficiencies and effectiveness in the process. And we had a Lean Six Sigma review done on the process, and we're using that to just continue to make gains. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that in the numbers. In fiscal year 22, we completed 76 shipments off of true waste to WIP. The expectation was 70. It used to be noteworthy to get a shipment off in a week. Now we're getting 3 to 4 shipments a week. So it's common practice. On-site true inventory has been reduced from about 1,340 to 890 drums, very significant. And LANL reduced the number of true drums on Hank pad and 480 pad by shipping to WIP. And we're also using that partnership to open up apertures of other waste streams, like the HNO3 cheesecloth, which accounts for hundreds of drums up here. We're about ready to get approval for those, as well as for classified waste shipments. So it's that continuous partnership. We meet on a monthly basis, that executive team, helping the people that we have doing good things in their respective areas, but it's providing that air cover to where, looking out of the box, where can we gain efficiencies and effectiveness in the process.
If I could just add one thing to that. This is an area where working closely with our environmental management colleagues has been important. One of the things that we've been able to do is combine waste shipments so that we can make, from my point of view, every truck is a precious resource. And we want to make sure that they are fully utilized. And sometimes by blending the waste shipments between the EM legacy waste and the newly generated waste that we're responsible for, we can get better utilization of that important resource.
Thank you, Dr. Mason. I just want to mention, since you weren't here for the earlier conversation, we had this similar conversation with EM, and we applaud the collaboration between all of the organizations to work on the waste management. And as you said, every shipment off the hill, regardless of where it comes from, is important. The citizens with whom we met over the past couple of days have expressed some concerns, and I just wanted to alert you to them that they don't want newly generated waste to displace the removal of the legacy waste. And I think that Mr. McAlannis and his team, as well as you all, have made it clear this is about making the most of each shipment to make sure that there is no empty space on those trucks when they go to WIP.
Yeah, I would also say that we definitely have a shared fate with that program. We have as strong an interest in getting that waste off the hill as anyone else. And certainly, as you say, for anyone living in the state of New Mexico doesn't care whether it's a legacy waste drum or newly generated waste drum, they want to see it properly disposed of in WIP, I think.
If I can add, it's also a partnership with their neighbors, with the Pueblos and with the neighboring communities. I, as well as Tom, spent a lot of time talking with the Pueblo governors on shipments, in even offering training and emergency management and their plans, because as partners, they would, probably have an aid in responding to things that happen. So it's a collaborative partnership, not only with the feds and with the M&Os, but with our neighboring communities as well.
I appreciate that, and I encourage you to continue with transparency. I hope you'll stay for public comments, because you'll hear from some of the folks, I think, about this issue. So shifting gears to an issue that Dr. Mason brought up earlier, which is staffing to meet mission requirements. And this is a challenge. We talked about this a little bit. Staffing challenges exist across the country right now. So Exhibit 33, you can tell that Triad's been staffing up to meet the increasing mission requirements. We suspect that sometimes different mission components compete for one another for existing staff. It happens. Likewise, in our afternoon session, we learned that N3B is also trying to staff up. So this increased competition at LANL, this could increase competition at LANL and may create an unstable staffing environment between the influx of new folks and existing staff changing roles. Staff stability is important because it can take a nuclear facility worker multiple years to become fully effective in their duties, and we know that the average age of your workers has decreased significantly, which in some ways is a good thing, but it also reduces the number of years of experience as well. So, Dr. Mason, you spoke about this a little bit earlier with regards to craft, but I'd like to understand a little bit more about what Triad is doing to minimize staffing instability, particularly for positions that impact nuclear facility safety.
So, just to sort of frame the discussion, referring to this view graph here, in FY22, the number that we use for our staff is the 15,000 number that's cited there. That includes permanent full-time staff at the laboratory. It includes the craft workforce that I discussed. It also includes integrated subcontractors like the protective force that provides the security for PF4, amongst other things. Also includes postdoctoral fellows and students. So it's basically, everyone who comes to work at the lab, with the exception of, construction subcontractors, for example, are not included in that number. As you can see, it's been growing. In fact, if you go back a couple of years, we were growing at about, we were hiring about 1,000 to 1,200 people a year and losing about 500 to 600 due to just normal attrition and turnover, given the demographics of our organization. Obviously, that began to ramp up. You see the budget increase, particularly in FY21. We saw a significant budget increase, not solely due to the PF4 mission, but that's the largest single component of the growth. As a result, we've had to ramp up our hiring. For FY22, the goal that I set for the lab was to hire 2,000 new staff. We actually hired 2,077, so that was good. We actually beat the target. The thing that I did not anticipate was that our attrition would jump from that 500 to 600 a year that we'd been tracking with, as I said, based on demographics, to almost doubling. We lost 1,100 people in FY22. So our net growth was 1,000. We had been planning for a net growth of about 1,500. So even though we met our hiring target, we fell short in terms of the net growth because of this increase in attrition. The increase in attrition was not really an increase in retirements. We have a pretty good model for when we expect people to retire. We know, how old they are and how long they've been at the lab. And, a lot of people stick around for a long time, but eventually there's grandkids and so forth, and they'll retire. That number pretty much tracked with our projections. The increase in attrition was predominantly in the early career staff, 0 to 5 years. As you mentioned, that's painful for us, because it takes a while for people to become effective in our environment. Typically, you have to first get a security clearance, and then if you're in PF4, often you're in the human reliability program, and then there's specialized training that's required to become, for example, a fissile materials handler. You know, these are not skills that are really taught you can't go to university and to get a degree in how to make nuclear weapons. That's actually a good thing. We like that that's not widely disseminated knowledge, but it means we invest a lot to get our staff to the point where they can really function in the environment we need. So if they leave at year 4, you know, we have to start again. So as a result, now this increase in attrition is not unique to Los Alamos. It's been manifested all across the NNSA. In fact, it's sort of a nationwide thing. You read about the Great Retirement, or Great Resignation rather, and you know, the pandemic, and that causing people to reevaluate what they're doing, and of course some interest in remote work, and you can't make pits in your garage. I'm sorry, that's not going to happen. Can't do classified work at home and so forth. So we can't necessarily completely respond to those challenges. But in the areas where we can respond, we're working hard to do so. So we recently, last year, we implemented a new work locations policy that does allow for some hybrid and telework for occupations where it's possible to do that. We together with other NNSA sites, with the approval of NNSA and the administrator's help, we're able to do a mid-year salary adjustment, which to my knowledge has not happened in as long as I've been in the system, which is getting on 25 years or so. Normally there's an annual cycle and we get approval, and you know, it happens in January, and when partway through the year we saw these attrition numbers, we said we can't wait, and so we did a mid-year salary adjustment. Not huge, but you know, it helps. We've also been able to increase the funding for promotions, which is important in an environment where one of the reasons people leave is because we're experiencing high inflation. One way to address that is to move to another job where you can get a promotion and an increase in salary. If the lab doesn't have sufficient promotion funds to offer that opportunity for staff who are eligible, it's essentially encouraging them to look elsewhere. So that's another step that we took. In September, we announced a number of changes to our benefits packages, so it's not just compensation, to ensure that we remained competitive. The lab had actually pretty good benefits for people with a lot of tenure, but not so good benefits, particularly for the early career staff, and of course that's where we were seeing the most attrition. So we improved the benefits for everyone, but most of the investment was really targeting where we were seeing the greatest attrition. And I would say now we actually have a very competitive benefits, and we're trying to address the compensation. So we are hiring. I'm just speaking to the cameras in the audience. You know, if you're interested, we're going to have to continue to grow. And we're not going to be successful unless we can both attract and, even more importantly, retain the staff needed to do our mission.
I'll just note to my staff, he was not talking to you. So along the same lines, over the past few years, our resident inspectors have informed us that Triad has been making concerted efforts to identify late career staff with superb track records and put their skills to use mentoring the next generation. We also understand that as folks retire, you're trying to compensate by identifying high-performing mid-career staff and putting them into rotations as trainers. So we're just curious how well this is working, and is this a model that can be replicated in other places, and does it balance short-term losses in productivity with overall longer-term need to grow the entire workforce?
Yeah, so some of those changes actually came about really as a consequence of some of the organizational changes that I discussed earlier. So there was an initiative within the weapons production organization to get mentors on the floor. It's part of a broader initiative that we have that's focusing on first-line managers, because I think we generally believe, and we have evidence to support our belief, that the biggest impact we can have in terms of the safety of our operations is having first-line managers who are engaged on the floor, coaching, providing guidance to their staff. So part of it is providing mentors, experienced people. In some cases, they may be retirees who've had successful careers, who aren't interested in working full-time, but are willing to come back part-time and work with maybe recently appointed first-line supervisors to help them grow into that role. So that's I think, one important element. We've also instituted, we're taking advantage actually of a program from one of the parent companies of Triad Battelle called LOSA, which is the Lab Operations Supervisor Academy, which is a scenario-based experiential training program where we have real-world scenarios that actually happened, in labs where managers are placed in difficult situations. You have someone who's coming down hard on you because you're behind schedule, but you've got some issue that needs to be addressed that requires taking the facility down, and how do you navigate, those competing pressures? And so we have our first-line supervisors walk through those exercises with people role-playing, changing it up. One time you're in one role, the other time, you could be pretending to be Ted, observing this, and that we've found to be valuable as well. I think the challenges we have with staffing and staff coming in with less experience are occurring elsewhere in the complex, so there absolutely are opportunities to share those lessons, and we're both trying to take good ideas from other places and also working to export what we've learned. I would say, and we've actually taken a look at this in the when things happen, when there's an off-normal event. Of course, we always do an analysis to determine what happened, what are the root causes, what are the steps we need to mitigate. One of the things we've tried to be alert to is, are we seeing things happening because we have a lot of new staff who have less experience? And actually, maybe a little bit surprising, in many cases that is not really the driving factor. In fact, we're finding a lot of the new staff who are coming in, because we've set up things like our new employee training academy, they're getting a kind of uniform exposure to how to do things, are coming in a way that in fact can be educational for the long-time staff. So it's not simply a case of, you have all these inexperienced staff and they will make mistakes. Yes, they will. That's why it's good to have experienced people around them. But they also come with a lot of very different skills that, are things that maybe people like myself who've been around for longer, didn't have the opportunity to learn them. So I think there can be a lot of give and take between the new staff and the experienced staff to the benefit of both.
Thank you.
If I could just say a little bit here, because I think everybody else with me could testify that we're spending an enormous amount of time on this staffing issue and energy and trying to affect a cultural change associated with the way the National Nuclear Security Administration works with our labs, plants, and sites to enable competitive environments because of this attraction and retention issue. And it's my belief that I've been in the complex 40 years in January, actually, and there was never a mid-year salary adjustment, so I could speak for at least that long. And that was, there was a big need, and we said we can do this, right? And we did in the time frame that mattered. And it's not only that, but many other initiatives to relax parameters on benefits and so forth, so that Tom and his colleagues who manage these institutions can do the right things for the localities, and that we can learn from one another, and we talk about it every time we're together as a group. And so our workforce are in the M&O contractors, they're never, you're not going to compete with successful startup companies and a lot of other things, but we can spend our money better, and we can stay more competitive, and I intend to make this, as important as anything else, because it's the only way we're going to deliver, our mission safely and securely, and all the things we need to do. So I think Tom and at Los Alamos has done a fabulous job, but this is throughout the complex. Thanks.
Thank you. Tom?
Thank you, Chair Connery. To follow up with this line of discussion, and really appreciate your candid responses, to Dr. Mason, over the last 5 years, Triad has hired many people, as you said. In response to this hiring blitz, Triad's developed substantial new employee training programs, and you had mentioned specifically the new Employee Training Academy. Figure 34 shows some of the new training centers and program documentation. I was lucky enough to tour one of those centers over the summer, and I was very impressed by what I saw. So, Dr. Mason, we understand that seasoned employees do not go through the rigorous training that is designed for the new employees that you were referring to. Can you discuss whether there is currently a conflict between how the new employees perform work based upon their training and how the seasoned employees perform work based upon their training and experience?
Yeah, I alluded to the fact that, there is a difference in the experience, and I wouldn't characterize it as a conflict necessarily. I think there are definitely things that the new employees need to learn from the experienced employees who know the facility, know how to operate in that environment, and that experience base is not something that we want to give up on. But I think the advantages that we're seeing from the approach that we're taking, which was, shamelessly borrowed actually from the Navy, is that there is a good common understanding of expectations, and it's designed to get people to a point of effectiveness sooner than would otherwise be the case. When you're only hiring a very small number of people, the tendency historically was we put them into the work environment and they learned by mentorship and doing. That works with a small number of hires. It's not scalable to what we're doing at the moment. So we had to do something different, but we are seeing significant benefits. And in fact, I think that dialogue between the senior staff and the new hires is a two-way dialogue for that reason. I would say that we are also working to provide more training for the incumbent staff also. I mentioned this Lab Operations Supervisor Academy is one example. We're also doing something we call Management Boot Camp. And of course, there's a lot of ongoing training requirements for the facilities where there's annual qualifications that are required, and we're working to improve that since, at times the sort of canned PowerPoint presentation is not necessarily the best way to touch people's hearts and minds.
Thank you, Dr. Mason. Chair Connery?
I think it's over to you, Ms. Robertson.
Thank you, Chair Connery. Earlier this year, the NNSA Field Office requested an assessment of conduct of operations at PF4 following a series of significant operational events. For the public's awareness, conduct of operations is a way of ensuring work is performed in a formal, predictable manner that minimizes errors. For example, one example might be strictly following procedures. One of the events of concern occurred in 2021 when a worker jammed open a field valve, causing 1,800 gallons of water to spill onto the storage vault floor as pictured in Exhibit 35. We have a quote from that assessment that we would like to highlight on the left side of Exhibit 35. In summary, it states that there is an expectation for NNSA facilities to have the same level of conduct of operations as the nuclear Navy and commercial nuclear power programs. But NNSA facilities are not resourced to allow for that. So, Administrator Ruby, does NNSA expect Triad's level of formality of operations to be on par with the nuclear Navy and commercial nuclear power plants?
Yes.
Okay, unequivocally, yes. And so what is being done to get there?
Well, again, just sort of going back to the discussion we just had about training, staffing, doing things to enable mission success. So one, let's see, as you may know, the Naval Reactors Program reports to me as well. So we have an opportunity to know up close and personal some of their programs. And you know, it never works to copy something exactly, but Tom has described a really impressive set of training classes that they've put into place at Los Alamos, and I can say that, you know, our other labs, plants, and sites have done some similar things. We have to also empower the employees and have good oversight and bureaucracy. You know, earlier in my career, when the Department of Homeland Security was stood up, I had the opportunity to support from the laboratory, from Sandia, and for the first time I realized all the advantages of bureaucracy when I saw an organization that was, you know, created without any, right? I mean, there is some need for bureaucracy and oversight, but it has to be done in a way that empowers employees and produces innovation and creativity, and not just be burdensome and drive them away to places they feel they could be more productive. So in addition to the things that we've talked about in terms of competitive benefits, in terms of training, to attract and retain the right kind of people, we're also trying to work on having a productive and efficient enterprise that makes people feel good about what they do every day and how they come to work. So those are all the elements that we're trying to put together. This is not easy, and its results won't be immediate, but we're spending a lot of time trying to define what it is, talk to people about it, and make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Administrator. Dr. Mason, you cited a list of initiatives you're undertaking organizationally earlier, and we appreciate those for the record. I wonder if there's, you know, some significant gaps that you're still trying to fill when it comes to modeling yourself that way.
Yeah, I think specifically with regard to conduct of operations, that's something that we're still trying to build into the culture. I mean, our programs are certainly based on the lessons learned from the nuclear Navy and commercial nuclear power programs. I would say that there are some important differences, not in terms of the expectation of, you know, adherence to procedure when there are procedures and so forth. I think the expectations really do have to be the same. I think the difference is that you know, the PF4 facility has a very diverse mission and lots of different sorts of operations that change. You know, I mean, it's one of the things it does is research, which sort of by definition is going to be different every time. I would say pit production tends more closely towards the kind of model that you would see in the nuclear Navy or commercial nuclear, in the sense that once we get up and running, you know, we will be in a more routine mode of doing the same sorts of operations in the same way. And so that will more closely resemble, whereas in other parts of the facility where you're doing one-offs, you know, you have to have a little bit more flexibility, but that doesn't remove the need to do things right. I think we're also trying to apply sort of the concept of conduct of operations more broadly across the lab, not in the sense of capital C, capital O, conduct of operations, which has a particular connotation and, you know, its own DOE Order 422 for nuclear operations, but more what you might call disciplined operations, which may be applicable even in non-nuclear environments. And in some respects, actually, you know, the nuclear facilities are probably more mature than some of the other operations, although I would say in terms of the high explosives work that we do, which is, you know, certainly no one would say that wasn't a high hazard operations, it doesn't look that different. And so we're trying to make sure that we get that promulgated more broadly across the lab. And I would say at this point, you know, we have areas in the lab that do really, really well, areas actually within PF4 that do really, really well. And what we're trying to do is take those examples and propagate them, you know, into some of the areas where it's maybe, you know, not as embedded in the culture and the way of thinking.
Thank you, sir. Chair Connery?
Mr. Summers, over to you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did Mr. Weicker want to speak to that?
Well, actually, if I can address it from a field office perspective.
Absolutely.
Thank you. You know, and I know, you know, since arriving, I know this has been a good partnership on conduct of operations. And we talk about mission focus, getting the job done. It has to be done safely and securely. Key to getting that work done is conduct of operations and discipline operation. You know, it's not just another requirement. You know, it's how things are done at the lab, and that's the culture, you know, that the lab leadership is putting in place, and that's what we sort of see. And that really enables mission and work. It's really the foundation for the laboratory safety culture as well. You know, a lot of improvements in this area. You know, a lot of it is the training that is done, you know, for existing employees as well as new people coming in, but it's also leadership on the floor. You know, walking the floor, walking the spaces, a real-time way to, you know, provide, you know, to express their expectations with respect to, you know, discipline operations, just like for safety and security. You know, the LANL's conduct of operations is based on, like you mentioned, the programs of the nuclear Navy, where I came from, as well as commercial nuclear programs. But it's something that has to be done site-wide. You know, discipline operations, as Tom mentioned, because no matter where it happens at the lab, it's still the same results. And there's also a unique aspect with the lab culture and also pivoting and going to a production culture a little bit. It's even more important for that, you know, for that discipline operations, conduct of operations to be in all pieces of it. And we talked about bringing in new staff. That's like, you know, it's a challenge, but there's also an opportunity. And I know lab leadership has taken advantage of that opportunity by bringing in change agents that understand discipline operations, conduct of operations, which we're seeing spread throughout the lab.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your input.
Thank you, Ms. Connery. My next question is going to be for Mr. Weicker, and be interested in hearing your perspective on field office oversight, especially on nights and on weekends. So Triad has aggressively ramped up their work during nights and weekends, as we're all aware. This work includes hazardous activities, such as removing old, contaminated glove boxes and other pieces of equipment like those that we see on the right in Exhibit 36. We understand that NNSA is not yet staffed up fully to provide consistent federal oversight during off hours. So, Mr. Weicker, do you believe that there are activities in the near future that occur off hours that require federal oversight?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. And, this is a really important effort. It's actually an area where we've made, a lot of significant improvements as well. You're right, this is an exciting time, exciting place, as we've talked about today, and it requires a great federal staff, which I have the privilege of supporting. And we have to have the personnel, on that staff to do that. And it's a unique office in the sense that we have most of the same things that other field offices have, but then we also have sort of the pivot in terms of mission, keeping the jewel of the complex, the lab, but then pivoting also to PIP production, which requires different functions in terms of safety basis approval, startup type activities, 24/7 operations, like you mentioned, security pieces, projects, permitting, which is an immense task, as well as community engagement. Everything we do here, we have to effectively communicate with our neighbors in the community. Over the last year, and this is with leadership's attention and making this happen for us, we've had the same challenges that the lab has in terms of recruiting people, retention, getting them here, and keeping them here. We've had 11 retirees from the field office. We had a staff of 80. We're at about 100 now. Their ceiling is 102. And a big focus has been across the board, but in terms of safety and operations, or facility representatives, for example, we had 7, a year ago. We have 16. And 6 of them are, phase 2 qualified, and we're actually bringing in folks that have left and were previously PF4 qualified and coming back. So, I think from an oversight perspective for supporting 24/7, in my mind, we need at least 6. And I need to get 9 back reps. We're on target to do that. And it's across the board for everything. For nuclear safety specialists, we actually have our cap for nuclear safety specialists. But again, the thing I mentioned earlier, it's not just the field office; it's the enterprise. We rely on resources from all the other field offices, and they rely on resources from us, as well as from headquarters, so that we take advantage of the SME and leverage the resources that's available across the complex to do those missions I was talking about for this field office.
So, Mr. Wyka, I appreciate that as you build towards the 9 that you hope to have, I would imagine, in the near future, that the 6 that you have, is that sufficient resources to be able to provide weekend and evening activity coverages to provide sufficient federal oversight?
Thank you, sir. It is. It's not optimum, but it's enough to provide coverage, obviously during the days and sporadically, incrementally, in evenings and swing shifts. But then I have others that are FACT qualified or, ability SMEs that I can also use for oversight activities on the back shifts and swing shifts where we do construction and maintenance and other type activities.
Thank you, Mr. Wyka. Madam Chair.
So we just heard that your Los Alamos field office, which we see in Exhibit 37, is making some gains, but still needs to grow its workforce to align federal oversight capability with the production mission. We know from our own experience trying to hire resident inspectors for the laboratory that the cost of living in the Los Alamos region can be an impediment to attracting talent. We also know that your federal workforce has constraints on compensation options not faced by your contractor partners. Can you discuss your views on whether NNSA's hiring authorities support its current need for federal oversight? That's to you, Administrator.
It's a complicated question. So we have, let me pull it apart. So one thing is, do we have enough people? And that is a discussion that we have every year during our budget process. We have a goal, but we have trouble honestly getting the approval for the number of people that we feel we need every year. So we compromise and we work hard, and this is process that's led by Frank Rose, the principal deputy, to allocate the people to the places we really feel they're needed. And so Ted talked about, you know, his cap. I mean, he was so far below his cap, he didn't need more people, he needed help filling the slots, and there was attention put on that particular problem. And special help, Ted, not, but, you know, we really said we've got to fit, I mean, we need the Los Alamos field office to be staffed up and put a real emphasis on that with some success. And with a lot of success, actually. I mean, and the quality of the people are really remarkable as well. There is also, are we getting in our own way in terms of how we hire and the processes that we use for that? So there's the numbers and optimizing the amount of time it takes and the way to attract people and the way to appropriately pay the federal employees as well. And we are also, there's room for improvement there. I think we have improved. We need to continue to do so. So we continue to look for opportunities to have a process that attracts the kind of people that we want in the timely manner that we need them. And I don't know, Jim, if you want to say anything here, because you also pay a lot of attention to this.
Right, we have the two problems that the administrator, or the two challenges that the administrator talked about. What is our top line? What is the numerical number that we can bring on board to our federal part of the team, and the resources to cover those, because then you have to have training and travel and all those other things. But then there's the speed and the ability to just keep up with the gap between, at any given time, there are dozens of unfilled positions across NNSA. And if we could figure out how to hire those good people a little faster, we would operate closer to our top margin, and that would have an immediate benefit. So we have to work on both those things, and we are. I can attest that among all the busy things with Ukraine and all the other things that are dragging on the administrator's time, that her focus on this is, in my recent experience, greater than, or certainly no less than any other administrator. And so, it reflects, the performance is a direct reflection of the priority that the administrator puts on it.
I recognize that some of these things are out of your control, that, obviously you can speed up the process and you can push for more individuals, but I was alluding to, maybe outside of your purview, your wish list with regards to potential locality pay, better use of incentives. We talked about benefits pack, relocation benefits. Are there levers that you could use, or that you could consider asking Congress for, that would help you in this scenario?
Yeah, I'm confident the answer to that is yes. But I will also be honest with you that has not been our emphasis yet. Our emphasis first was to try to get the numbers right, try to get the allocation of those right, and then try to hit those targets. But we'll see where this economy goes, but we may need more tools in the toolkit, if it continues on the path it's been the last year or so.
I'm reminded of a phrase, deputies are expendable, so maybe I can go. One of the things, I'll just express if I had some way to wave a magic wand and have some wish granted, it would be to make it easier to move people around on details between various parts of the federal organization, and honestly, between the federal organization and our M&O partners. that the step change in the performance and understanding of the overall enterprise, if we could figure out how to be more dynamic in how we let people acquire experience, I can't think of a thing that would have a more immediate step change than that, and it is fraught with lots of challenges.
Ooh, that sounds like a longer conversation of pluses and minuses. But I'm mindful of time, and I do want to get to public comment. So I want to be specific, and I know, Mr. Weicker, you talked about the fact that you've got folks in calls right now for FAC reps. I was a little shocked when we toured PF4 and realized you only had one fully qualified FAC rep for all of PF4. And so I kind of want to understand what happened and what are you doing to get folks qualified, because that just seems unhelpful.
Thank you, ma'am. You're right. As of now, we have one Phase 1 qualified FAC rep in PF4, but we're in the process now of, there's a converting, 6 FAC reps that are fully qualified Phase 2, and so we're moving them into positions to support PF4, as well as we brought a couple back that were previously PF4 FAC reps, that should go through accelerated qualifications. And we're also using others on the staff that were PF4 qualified FAC reps to do that type of oversight, as well as SMEs.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I'm going to turn to my other fellow board members. Do you all have additional questions you want to ask at this time? Summers?
Thank you, Chair Connery. I don't have any further questions for the panelists. Thank you very much.
Ms. Roberson?
Just one follow-up question, Mr. Weicker. Do you know when you're going to have 2? I mean, we know they're in qualification, but it's a lot of stuff going on in that facility. And we're just wondering.
Yeah, that's a real near term to have at least, several within PF4. But again, the 1 plus additional folks that are PF4 qualified, that are FAC rep qualified, also spend time doing oversight in PF4, as well as subject matter experts.
So near term, you're expecting?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you, sir. No further questions. Sure.
So I just want to let you know that I moved the schedule to the left.
They moved the
So this actually concludes the question portion of the hearing. And what I would like to do now is to go, it's, what time is it? It is 7:45. I'd like to take a break until 8 o'clock. At that point in time is when we would invite the public to make public comments. If you've signed up already, there should be a list. You'll be called in the order that you're on that list. If you haven't signed up yet, now's your chance. Please go forward and put your name on the list to sign up, and we encourage our colleagues from LANL and NNSA to stay for public comments, and then after that, the board will make its closing comments. You can either stay at the dais, or if it's more comfortable, you can sit into the audience. And then depending on how many people sign up, will determine how long we'll give you to speak. We just have to do that math in a moment. So I do want to, in the interim, thank the panelists for their candor and their openness in answering our questions. And let's take a brief recess until 8 o'clock and return for public comment. Thank you.